Welcome back, Helluva Boss fans. Today, we're going to be breaking down the story of Helluva Boss so far, with its 2 complete seasons, as well as what plot points and mysteries were left in the air at the end of Season 2. This is a good reminder for those who haven't watched the show since it last left off, and a good introduction for the new fans who will be coming in with the show airing on Amazon Prime soon, as this video won't just tackle the actual plot points episode by episode, but the way that the show developed to get from where it started to where it is today. As we've seen recently, getting picked up by a major streaming service doesn't steal views from YouTube, but actually brings more fans to those channels to keep updated on the various projects. It brought new Has-Been Hotel fans on Amazon Prime over to YouTube for Helluva Boss. It's brought new Digital Circus fans over from Netflix, it's brought new Murder Drones fans over from Amazon Prime, and already there's an influx of new fans who are just getting into Helluva Boss because of the news that it's coming to Amazon Prime as well. With that in mind, VivziePop announced at San Diego Comic-Con this year that the next episode of Helluva Boss will actually be a remake of the original pilot titled Mission Zero. This was explained to be a way to reintroduce the world of Helluva Boss to fans both old and new, by starting the new season off with an entry-level story. Helluva Boss has gone through some major changes over the years, and even for the returning fans, things are going to be a bit different now that Stolas is moving in with Blitz. It's a reversal of the roles they had in seasons 1 and 2, with Stolas having power and success over Blitz, and now Blitz being the one with power and authority over Stolas for seasons 3 and 4. The new pilot will rewrite the original story, likely presenting it as a flashback episode and maybe even cutting to the present here and there to show the current situation. This would be similar to what they did in Season 2 Episode 1, where the majority of the episode was a giant flashback to Stolas and Blitz meeting as children. For longtime fans, this is actually going to be an extremely interesting episode to see, despite it rehashing some of the pilot, as the pilot is the most controversial episode for theorists and lore-obsessed freaks like me. It's possible that this entire episode is being written because of how much theorists like me like to cite the pilot, even though it's clearly outdated. With this new pilot, we will have a 100% canon version of the story, and the original will only ever be cited again in theories about what an alternate version of the Helluverse might have looked like if the story hadn't developed differently from that starting point. With that in mind, I don't actually want to discuss the original pilot too much in detail here. Certain elements we even think of as key parts of the pilot can be changed and maybe turned on their head just for the sake of it because the pilot isn't canon. What it did have was a really funny, almost hard to follow montage of events introducing us to our characters, their dynamics, and the absurd humor of their business. We learn that Blitz is a boss who just wants attention, that he's mean to Moxie because he likes to see his reaction, but somehow has the approval and respect of his wife Millie. Meanwhile, he's adopted a hellhound named Luna who no one seems to get along with, but who Blitz uses as a way to convince himself that they are all one big happy family with very few boundaries. Stolas was introduced here as well, but as a rather villainous character who we know from episode 1 to be radically different than what we see in the pilot. So with this pilot as it is erased until further notice, the only thing we know for sure about this new version of the story is that it's about Blitz and his team, Moxie, Millie, and Luna, who make up IMP. The Immediate Murder Professionals, a business where they go up to Earth to assassinate people on behalf of sinners. The true canon begins in episode 1 of season 1, which in many ways was already a second version of the pilot. This episode is much loved, but it's noted as being one that contains the least development in the series, I would say, building off of nothing and really just clarifying what is different from the pilot instead. The original pilot was designed to look like one of the YouTube videos made by Brandon Rogers, who voiced Blitz and became a co-producer on the series. It is in part because of Brandon Rogers that the series took such a big turn away from the original plan set up in the pilot. In the first episode, the story is presented in a much more linear fashion, with the story being built around what is meant to feel like a run-of-the-mill mission to reintroduce the audience to the concept of the show. Later episodes will actually use this premise very little, with only about half of season 1 actually focusing on a mission going up to Earth, and even those are just used as interesting ways to build out the lore of heaven and hell. But originally, the idea was that Helluva Boss would focus on the IMP gang going up to Earth pretty much every single episode in order to kill humans, at least as far as I understand it. For this episode, it started with Blitz being hired by Mrs. Mayberry, a recently deceased sinner who wants revenge against the woman who was sleeping with her husband. We would later learn that Mrs. Mayberry was also sleeping with this woman herself, hence why she had such a vendetta against her and her family, as it was a double betrayal. Despite this, Mrs. Mayberry and this woman, Martha, ended up carrying on their relationship once Martha ended up in hell. The big twist in this episode was, of course, that that Martha and her family were actually murderous cannibals. And by most people's standards, it wouldn't really be a tragedy if they were removed from the system. The drama of the episode was more so around Martha's kids, who, while still cannibals, are argued to at least deserve the chance to figure out how wrong their lifestyle is and to try to change it as adults before being killed and having a permanent sentence in either heaven or hell. The moral dilemma of whether it was okay for demonic assassins to kill an entire family is something that actually alluded to the later reveal of Moxie's own father being a mob boss, with Moxie being raised in his little mafia family. Before taking on the client, Moxie is seen worrying about whether or not it's really okay to take out an entire family. But after giving it some consideration, he thinks that if the dad is bad, or if it's a mob family, then maybe it's understandable. This actually reveals a lot of Moxie's feelings about being raised by his father. Despite getting away from that and wanting to have a more moral life, Moxie is rationalizing here that it would have been okay for someone to assassinate his father and even him when he was younger, likely remembering all the terrible things he had to do just to make his father more rich. It is because Moxie got away and did start a new life that he considers to be more moral that he realizes that they shouldn't kill the rest of the target's family after Martha had been eliminated. Moxie doesn't believe that no one is above dying here, but as an adult, Moxie sees Martha as an active participant in the game of life and death, choosing to enter it when she decided that she was going to take the lives of other people herself. But the kids needed a chance to figure out things for themselves, at least until the cops ended up annihilating their entire household. The big difference between the pilot and this new first episode was of course the portrayal of Stolas. With the rest of the episode basically being a run-of-the-mill adventure made to feel like the pilot, it's here that we got to see what the writers actually wanted us to take away from the story this time. Later episodes would start running off in their own directions and each have their own unique premise, but by keeping this new first episode very basic, the audience was able to see the new version of Stolas with everything else maintaining its simplicity. Now guys, I have to be honest here, I will forever mourn the original Stolas, and the version of the show that would have included him. If you're this far in, I have to imagine you've seen the pilot and know exactly what I'm talking about, as he didn't just have a different, more serious voice actor, but Stolas was a much more menacing character. In the pilot, Stolas was a threat that Blitz actively seemed to fear, not just treat passive-aggressively. The Stolas we see in episode 1, meanwhile, is our nervous buffoon who is doing his best to keep Blitz in his life with as little enforcement as possible, letting Blitz just run off with his grimoire and use it in his business for some time until he needed it back. In the pilot, Blitz seemed to know that there is no real escaping Stolas, and the only way to even end his conversation with him was for him to destroy his phone entirely and have Luna drink it as a smoothie. Instead of trying to tell Stolas that he needs to leave him alone like he does in episode 1, Blitz actually takes on more work on behalf of Stolas in order to avoid sleeping with him. It's a pretty big flip in their dynamic, and the first episode keeps things as close to the pilot as possible to really emphasize this first big difference, I think, signaling a huge change in where the story is going to go. With episode 1 being a sort of redo of the pilot, it wasn't until episode 2 that we got to see why these changes to Stolas were actually important. In episode 1, we had only seen Stolas interacting with Blitz over the phone. In episode 2, however, we get the story mostly from the point of view of Stolas and his daughter Octavia, showing the reality of his life that was drastically different from the pilot. Here, we didn't just see the cheerier version of Stolas that was introduced in episode 1, but we gotta see how part of that is a facade used to keep his daughter, Octavia, more happy. By the end of season 2, Octavia becomes one of the most important elements of the plot, but it was here in episode 2 that we first got to see what her issues were going to be. The episode opened with a flashback of Octavia's childhood, where Stolas came in to sing an epic lullaby to calm her nightmares and help her fall back asleep. The nightmare had been that Stolas was going to go away and leave Octavia behind, and in many ways that did end up happening. Years later in episode 2, Octavia is a depressed teen who has become aware that her father fakes being happy around her in order to get through his marriage to Stella, and this has led to a darker, more depressed teen phase for Octavia. Up until this episode, Octavia seems to be dealing with her reality healthily enough for a teenager. She is aware that her mother is screaming at her father every day, and she's aware that her father is putting on an act to be nice and try to keep things from falling apart, mostly for her sake. And she's allowed to show her disdain for the situation by just being depressed, by taking on a style and musical tastes that reflect that. The problem is that in this episode, Stolas takes Octavia to a theme park in the Greetering where Blitz and his squad are supposed to be their bodyguards. And when seeing her father interacting with Blitz, Octavia gets to see what her father actually looks like when he's happy. She had seen him with a smile many times, but the authentic smile that Stolas had with Blitz is something she likely hadn't seen since she was a kid, and Stolas was taking her to Lululand with just the family. Now Lululand was a place that Stolas was using to have special moments with Blitz instead of her, really just using Octavia in order to create a situation where he can be closer to Blitz. It's not that Octavia really liked this theme park anymore, and she didn't have the kind of joy she had going there that she might have as a child. As she entered her teen years and went into this depressed phase, she likely thought she was just accepting the inevitable reality, but now she can see that her father is capable of real happiness, and that makes her a bit sad. It makes her feel like she's going to be replaced.
Are you gonna run off with him and leave me behind?
At the time this dramatic episode aired, we had no idea what was going to happen or how soon it was going to happen. But Octavia's fears eventually came true by the end of season 2, with Octavia becoming something of an afterthought in the drama of Stolas' life. Here in episode 2, however, Stolas reassured Octavia that he was never going to leave her. But even with Blitz seemingly hating Stolas at this point in the story, it was already clear that Stolas was going through a big change in his life and Octavia was going to be a victim of it. This episode did a good job of showing what the shifted focus of the show is going to be, moving from one-off adventures up to Earth each episode to exploring the dynamic of Blitz and Stolas, the life of Stolas himself, and the world of Hell as a whole. Unlike episode 2, the next few episodes did of course still involve the gang going up to Earth, but with the introduction of the location of Lululand in the Greed Ring, it opened up the world of Hell to an insane degree that begged for more exploration. Until this episode, Hell had been presented as just one massive land under a dark red sky, which some fans felt made Hazbin Hotel a bit hard to watch with that harsh color theme. By going to Earth on missions each episode, Helluva Boss would avoid the constant haze of red from the beginning of each episode to its end. But by expanding Hell and going from one land to 7 lands or rings stacked on top of each other, they found a way to bring more color to the show while building up their lore. The episode didn't even discuss the concept of the rings, and instead, fans of the show back then had to figure out from Twitter that this green sky area was in the Greed Ring, and that sinners weren't allowed outside of the Pride Ring and thus not allowed in Lululand. It didn't take long for fans to piece together that there would be 7 rings of hell, each modeled after one of the 7 deadly sins, and each given a different colored sky in order to make the location feel different. The following episodes wouldn't bring us straight to any ring, but instead they set the idea that the show going forward would be more about building out the lore of Hell instead of just exploring randomly themed targets like the pilot or even in episode 1. In episode 3, for instance, the IMP gang does go up to Earth to kill humans, but the real focus is on the imps competing with Verosika and her succubus crew. This expanded not just the history of Blitz when it was revealed he dated Verosika, but it also gave us a lot of hints about the lust ring through their residents, the succubus. This was the real fun of the early Helluva Boss fandom, when so little was actually known. It wasn't about trying to get to a new ring in every single episode and explaining every aspect of that ring, but rather visiting a ring felt more like an event, with the episodes in between just giving us little hints of what to expect from there via their local species or other references. Through Verosika and her crew in episode 3, we learned that the succubus have a bit of a celebrity status in Hell, being a class of entertainers, performers, and adult workers. They're taken advantage of just as everyone else is in Hell, but in a way that is seen as desirable by the other residents to some degree. Episode 4 continued this theme by having another mission to Earth, but once again turning the focus more towards world building instead of a fillery one-off adventure with humans who just end up dying. It was here that we learned not more about Hell, but about its relationship with Heaven through the introduction of the cherubs. We got to see our first look at Heaven through a commercial about the cherubs that the IMP gang watches on their TV, and then about the rigid rule structure of Heaven when the cherubs themselves are kicked out for accidentally getting some humans killed on Earth. Some people really hated this episode when it aired, and it's probably the lowest ranked episode in season 1, but I love it for the goofy angels. Episode 5, meanwhile, brought us to the Wrath Ring, our first visit to another ring since we first learned about them in episode 2. This was a much more epic visit, where we saw not just one establishment like Lululand in the Greed Ring, but an entire community and their culture surrounding Millie's hometown. It's in this episode where they would also begin to leave the trend of just exploring the lore of their show and begin focusing more on the emotional plot between Stolas and Blitz, primarily by having it revealed that Stella is aware of Stolas and Blitz's affair and sending the assassin Stryker to try and kill Stolas. All of these were really fun episodes in general and a way to keep the audience very engaged between between episodes as they started to tackle one of the key things that needed to change in the show from the pilot, which is Blitz avoiding Stolas. While the pilot was described as being not canon with the release of episode 1, they likely knew that changing the dynamics too much in episode 1 would have made fans disappointed. So while Stolas was made less evil and a lot more endearing, they had to keep the idea that Blitz was generally trying to avoid Stolas, even though they wanted fans to eventually ship them together. Instead of racing right into that, episodes 3, 4, and 5 each let us build the world of Hell while reinforcing the issues with Blitz and Stolas' dynamic and getting us to want to see that change, especially with episode 5, where Stolas is inviting Blitz and his employees to the Wrath Ring to see the Harvest Moon Festival, something intended by Stolas to be a romantic bonding opportunity. Blitz didn't quite see it that way and had some conflicting feelings about Stolas explored there, but it set the stage for fans to really want Blitz's feelings to be more conflicted than they appeared in the pilot or even in episode 1. But it was only after we've been immersed in the world for a few episodes before this could happen. That set the stage for episode 6, where the characters didn't just go up to Earth for another random mission, but they ended up being kidnapped by secret government agents investigating the paranormal. The episode was a lot of fun, but served two really important purposes story-wise. The first was about Moxie and Blitz's dynamic, which was played for laughs but had some serious issues with Blitz being a bit aggressive towards Moxie. What fans wanted ultimately was for Blitz to be more of a well-meaning father figure, and this episode allowed for Blitz's more mean comments to be written off as part of Blitz's own coping mechanism that keep people at arm's length. The second thing this episode established was the idea that Blitz did have some sort of interest, desire, or seeming connection with Stolas, whether he simply didn't want to admit it before, or it had just grown over time. While Blitz normally chases after others and they thus run away from him, Stolas is the one who chases after Blitz, and thus Stolas is one of the few people that Blitz himself actually tries to run away from. When given some truth gas and some crazy hallucinations, however, Blitz has a surreal dream where he sees himself as being controlled by Stolas, but also seemingly feeling like he's too beneath Stolas to have any other dynamic with him. It was the most emotional episode of the show since episode 2, with Stolas and Octavia having their family drama there. And this one ended with Blitz being rather friendly with Stolas after being rescued by him from the Agents of Dorks. And their fun little flirting at the end perfectly set the stage for episode 7, which was a weird place in the history of the show. Now after episode 6, the story was set up for a perfect two-part finale with episodes 7 and 8. But if you're new to the Helluverse fandom, you might not know that we actually had episode 8 delayed until sometime during season 2. You see, what happened was, apparently the show was only meant to have a 7-episode season the way that Vivzie Pop and Brandon Rogers originally wrote it. But after producing multiple episodes, it was decided that they would add an extra episode in between seasons 1 and 2, creating the 8th episode of season 1 as a sort of celebration of how far the show had come. In episode 7, Blitz started off wanting to just stalk Moxie and Millie to the Lustring, but in order to get into the club that they went into, he needed someone who could get in anywhere, such as Stolas, who is a royal prince. So Blitz invited Stolas to join him, who thought it was Blitz finally reaching out for a real date, and that's where things began to fall apart. With what little time they get before being interrupted, Blitz focuses on just spying on Moxie and Millie, and Stolas realizes that he's unfortunately just an accessory to Blitz's bigger plan. However, this was no ordinary nightclub that Moxie and Millie had made their reservation at, hence why Blitz couldn't get in on his own at the last minute, as this nightclub was actually run by one of the most elite demons in all of Hell, the ruler of the Lustring, Asmodeus. We had known from the real-life writings that inspired the show that there would be demonic princes that rule each ring, with us already knowing Lucifer being not just the ruler of Hell, but the ruler of the Pride Ring in particular. We had also seen the image of Mammon printed on the money in episode 2 of Helluva Boss in the Greed Ring, but the introduction of Asmodeus was the first time we saw one of these princes up close with an actual speaking role and a point in the story. This introduction really elevated the show's formula, making it so that the event episodes are no longer just visiting a ring, but ones where we actually meet one of the most important figures in all of Hell. In this episode, we also got to meet Fizzarolli, who we knew Blitz had some history with based on his interaction with RoboFizz in episode 2, but here they are shown to have had something of a personal relationship that went sour. The point of the episode was mostly just Fizzarolli and Asmodeus messing with Stolas and Blitz, which is crazy considering that they would become rather close allies by the end of season 2. But here in episode 7, Asmodeus accused Stolas of trading his entire life in order to sleep around with some random random imp for the sexual thrill. This was an assumption on Asmodeus' part and didn't really reflect Stolas' feelings for Blitz, but it picked at an insecurity that Blitz had been holding on to for some time. In future episodes, Blitz would allude multiple times to the idea that he had been in some sort of situationship before with an elite resident of Hell like Stolas, where things ended pretty negatively. Blitz wants to believe that Stolas is just using him for thrills before he eventually gets bored with him and throws him away. And he can't even rationalize Fizzarali having an actual meaningful relationship with Asmodeus because of this either. It's important to remember, however, that in episode 7, Asmodeus was doing his best to hide any lovey-dovey relationship with Fizz from the public. And this isn't just because of his own image, but because of the image of the elites as a whole in Hell. In Hell, the social norms dictate that it's okay for the elites to sleep with the lower classes, especially for someone like the ruler of Lust in particular. But these relationships are not perceived by the public as being loving. And the norm of these relationships tend to be the elites using the lower class demons in order to get their thrills, and those lower class demons just getting what they can out of the situation before it ends. This is something a lot of people really don't consider when thinking about why Blitz has such a specific mindset. Fizz will later act like Blitz is being silly by not understanding that Asmodeus does love him, but up to this point, they have been hiding this relationship from the world because no one can understand it. They were presenting themselves as the well-established stereotype that everyone in Hell knew. Whatever Blitz's past experience was, it was something that he already understood to be the truth of Hell, with those bad personal experiences really just confirming the pattern that he had seen everywhere else, which was the elite using the underclass. Because of this, when Stolas' affair is put on display as just some sort of kink at Ozzy's nightclub, Blitz takes Stolas home and refuses to join him inside. Stolas insists that they can just go in and relax, not do anything carnal, but part of the problem here is that Blitz doesn't see it that way. He knows the carnal relations is what Stolas wants, even if it's not something he'll go for that night, and because of that, his conditioning and experiences make him believe what Ozzy claimed at the club, that even if Stolas puts off having sex, it's because he just wants sex from Blitz later. Now, while there is an episode 8 for this season, as we said before, this was meant to be the original finale. By this point, however, the show had learned a lot about its production power and was creating larger, more elaborate episodes with stunning animation from back to front. With that in mind, it made sense to add an episode 8 in order to show this off, and to prepare the audience for what the show would look like more in season 2. However, the real big reason that episode 8 was said to be added on after episode 7 was due to the casting of Kesha as Beelzebub, the deadly sin of gluttony. This would make it the second episode in a row to feature a brand new ring, as well as introduce us to the ruler of that ring up close, which almost feels too epic for 2 episodes back to back. But because of Kesha's availability, it made sense to try and work the story in sooner instead of sometime in season 2, at least at the time. Unfortunately, this episode also ran into a little bit of legal trouble because Kesha was in a bit of a legal battle over the rights to her own music. Before this, episode 8 apparently got delayed despite being expected very closely after episode 7 due to some bad animation errors that had to be redone entirely. But even after this delay, the episode had to be delayed even more due to Kesha's contractual disputes with her music company. This didn't end quickly enough, and eventually episode 8 had to be released with Kesha's singing voice being replaced for the song Cotton Candy, kind of defeating the purpose of casting a big singer like Kesha. What's even more unfortunate is that by the time this decision was made, season 2 had already begun airing, because it didn't make sense to keep delaying the entire show over the issue of episode 8 with its one song. To explain the situation, VivziePop put out an illustrated announcement when this happened, where she said that episode 8 wasn't super important to the progression of the story due to it being a later developed idea squeezed between episode 7 of season 1 and episode 1 of season 2. And inserting this episode into the story actually made 3 episodes take place across the same night. Now, true to VivziePop's word, episode 8 really did feel like something that was sort of just slipped into the season. Episode 7 had ended with Blitz coming home to cry on his couch, with a note being left behind from Luna saying that she went to some Hellhound party with Veroska's bodyguard, Vortex. Episode 8 became about Blitz coming to the party to pick up Luna, and getting lost in trying to have fun and prove he is worthy of being chased. This was a stellar episode that did a lot to develop both Blitz and Luna, revealing Luna's insecurities in the Hellhound system, and showing how Blitz is dealing with a lot of pain over the way he's perceived in the world. By the end of the episode, however, we have Blitz back at the apartment where he started, crying again, just with Luna there now. It seems likely to me that the end of episode 7 probably was meant to have this scene with Blitz and Luna at the end of episode 8. But once they decided to make an 8th episode, they just moved the scene to the end of this one. To me, the episode 7 ending we have always felt a bit hasty, with Blitz coming home just to find Luna's note and then suddenly crying before fading to the title. And if this was the original season 1 finale, it would have made a lot more sense to have Luna be there and have this moment with Blitz where he cries about not wanting to die alone. When it was decided that Kesha would play Beelzebub, all they had to do was write an episode where Blitz goes to pick her up, and it even gave Luna a bit more of an emotional reason to be there for Blitz in the end, instead of just randomly seeing him come home looking all sad. But either way, it was an epic episode that, to me personally, felt even better than if we had watched it right after episode 7. As by giving us the season 2 premiere and even the second episode seeing stars, it gave us a little bit of a break from the more epic ideas that episode 8 had by introducing us to an entirely new ring as well as its ruler. Now, to many people, the Season 2 premiere was once again something of a rebooted pilot due to how it recontextualized moments from the pilot involving Stolas and Blitz. One thing that remained canon from the original pilot for sure was a scene where Blitz was shown to sneak out of Stolas' room with the grimoire and crash into Stella's tea party. In the Season 2 premiere, the primary focus was flashbacks of the childhood of Blitz and Stolas, but after that, the episode flashed forward to the night where Blitz and Stolas first met again as adults, after revealing a little bit of a bond they had when spending the day together on Stolas' birthday as children. In this recreation, we got to see Blitz stumbling out of the tea party, but also what happened afterwards. Stolas crashing out and telling Stella that he wants a divorce, really rubbing her nose in his affair. The build-up to this with the story of Stolas and Blitz's childhoods was some of the most interesting writing in the entire series, I think. In real life, people tend to have reasons for why the way they are beyond their natural impulses. We can each have different natural impulses that tend to make us unique people entirely, but it's how those natural impulses play out with unique scenarios that we become the people that we are in our lives. With Stolas, this was made really clear with a quick look at his childhood. But since the childhood was actually written after the story for Stolas was developed, it became a game of the writers taking what we do know about Stolas and explaining what would have happened to him to make him the way he is. Stolas ends up developing feelings for Blitz in particular, but even before meeting Blitz, he seemed to develop an attraction towards imps. This may be in part because Stolas had an imp butler watching over him as a child. This man would be around Stolas more than his father, and Stolas would grow up to see the image of an imp as potentially more comforting than that of his father. Despite this butler being given a caregiving role in Stolas' life, however, he's still very formal and very distant. So Stolas would go on to crave having an imp in his life who fills that role of being a comforting, almost father-like figure, while also being a bit more friendly and interested in Stolas in particular. This idea was likely developed through his interactions with his stuffed toy imp that he had as a child, with this stuffed smiling imp being the only friendly face he would see in a giant empty mansion. The ideal person for Stolas to meet then would be an imp who could fill all these different roles. Someone who was the perfect best friend, like a stuffed toy who would just do whatever Stolas wanted, but also had the basic image of the imp who had been his caregiver, while also being potentially more aggressive the way his father could be. This is the identity that Stolas would project onto Blitz after spending one day with him as a child, when his dad pays Cash Buxo to loan Blitz to him for Stolas' birthday. This was an elaborate ruse to steal the riches of the Ars Goetia, with Blitz just doing his best to get the job done while distracting Stolas, and because of that, Stolas was able to believe anything he wanted about Blitz, with the two just mirroring each other's desires. As long as Stolas played along with Blitz robbing him, Blitz would play along with their closeness, setting up the pattern that would continue as adults, with Blitz returning to steal the grimoire from Stolas. Stolas was happy to let it happen as long as Blitz played along with his fantasy, not just sleeping with Stolas, but leaning into the role of being the aggressive monster who keeps Stolas in control. But after a night of remembering these hazy memories, Stolas realizes that what he is doing with his life isn't working, and the Season 2 premiere marked a shift where he was going to try and give Blitz the space he needed instead of hogging his time. That didn't stop him from hanging out with our characters, as even in the very next episode, Blitz and Stolas have to team up and go to Earth in order to find Octavia after she steals the grimoire out of Blitz's office. This was one of 5 episodes that involved going up to Earth, with only a few of those actually being an assassination job. The transition further away from these missions up to Earth reflected the growing focus on the show to Blitz and Stolas' relationship, something that was being talked about or advanced even when we were focusing on other characters. Episode 3 took a more serious break from this story by focusing on Moxie and Millie. But even with the Moxie and Millie subplot, they're still doing commentary on Stolas and Blitz's dynamic. In this episode, the gang returned to the Greed Ring where we got to see a lot more of its background, as well as meet Moxie's dad, the mafia boss Crimson. This was part of an elaborate ruse that didn't make sense from start to finish, with Crimson trying to marry Moxie off to an ex-goon of his named Chad that Moxie actually dated in the past, because Crimson's money is drying up and he thought Chaz had plenty of cash to give him an infusion. Chaz, meanwhile, has no money himself, but was pretending to have money thinking that Crimson's family fortune could solve his own problems. Both were hoping the other would bail them out and not kill the other, which of course led to Chaz being killed so Crimson could stay a villain and come after Moxie later. It was a dramatic story that Blitz felt like he was barely a part of, but thematically, it was just more of his and Stolas' story playing out in another form. It's the story of two people who want to be together, and a mean father who wants to rip them apart for something that is beneficial to his goals with an unhinged marriage. Chaz is just Stella, Crimson is just Paimon, Moxie is Stolas, and Blitz is the Millie here. In the very next episode, however, the dynamic for Blitz and Stolas would begin to shift. In this episode, Stolas gets kidnapped by Stryker when Stella sicks him after Stolas again, and Stolas, very confidently I might add, tried to call Blitz to get him to help, while acting like he was in no sincere danger. At the time, Stolas probably thought he could still get away on his own, but the problem is that Stryker had a variety of angelic tools, not just weapons, but also things like angelic rope, meaning Stryker could capture Stolas without Stolas just using his powers to fly away. And the angelic weapons themselves can actually kill an immortal demon like Stolas, meaning in this episode, he almost died just like a regular demon or even a human does. The problem with this episode was that Blitz was still playing distant and was more focused on getting Luna to a doctor's appointment. To try and emphasize that what he and Stolas have is a business arrangement, he sent Moxie and Millie after Stolas to save him instead. And they did do a kick-ass job, leading to one of the best fight scenes in the show in my opinion, even with the funny switch-up of the music in it. But Stolas still got severely injured, and was nearly dead to such a point that he needed to be raced off to the hospital in order to survive. It was here that we finally got to see that Blitz isn't just scared of dying alone, but of losing Stolas in particular. Blitz gets to see Stolas rushed off to the hospital in a way he just didn't think was possible for a divine being like Stolas. It wasn't even that the angelic weapons could kill Stolas, as Blitz was aware they exist, but he didn't expect Stolas to fall so easily to this sort of plan. He had thought that Stolas was calling out to him as part of their game of trying to get back together, and because Blitz wasn't willing to play the game, Stolas almost died. And while that doesn't move Blitz to actually visit Stolas in the hospital, it did have Blitz reaching out in his own little way by phone to let him know that Stolas was on his mind. And that set up the rest of the season to be about how they might come back together, as rocky as it would be. After Western Energy, Helluva Boss tried to give us another little break from the Stolas drama again with an episode about Moxie and Millie's drama, which was not a fan favorite, but which is known for getting particularly uncomfortable with Moxie's character in his relationship with Millie. While we will later get an episode that was also considered a bit more Millie-focused, this one was important because it was about Millie and their relationship, setting the stage for the big reveal at the end of the season where she becomes pregnant and isn't sure what to do with their baby. And after this episode, we were still only halfway through the season at this point, so the writers started to give us more stories about the other characters, which still reflected the same ideas of Blitz's and Stolas' dynamic. This was done in what I consider to be the two-part mid-season special, the first of which is just called Oops, and the second of which is called Mammon's Mid-Season Special. While technically separate stories, they really build off of each other in important ways and really act more like a two-parter, with Oops just being a way to set up the mid-season special to actually take place with Blitz there. The story may feel rather distant from Blitz and Stolas, but with Fizz and Osmodius having a similar power dynamic to them, it was an important step in making Blitz realize that he does want to be with Stolas and that Stolas can want him in return. In the first of these two episodes, Fizz and Blitz ended up kidnapped together, and in that time, they opened up about their relationships. Here, Blitz insisted that someone like Osmodius could never love or care for a low-level imp like Fizz or Blitz. In part 2 of the story, however, Blitz becomes the bodyguard to Fizz, leading up to a big competition he's in, and gets to see more of the Fizz and Osmodius relationship up front. To start, it was Osmodius who wanted Blitz to help Fizz with this event, making a clear early indicator that he did care about him to Blitz. By the end of this episode, Fizz and Osmodius would also reveal their relationship publicly, something Blitz just couldn't imagine as possible. When his dynamic with Stolas was put in front of everyone by Ozzy himself, Ozzy had made it out like the only thing Stolas could want with Blitz was a sexual thrill. But now the King of Lust himself was admitting to being all lovey-dovey with an imp who he legitimately just has feelings for. And I think this is where Blitz began to really crack. The king of lust himself had previously reinforced the idea that higher elites cannot love lowly imps, but with this same elite revealing to have his own lovey-dovey relationship with Fizz, it gives Blitz the real-world experience he needs to know that Stolas could potentially actually have feelings for him. It was an epic two-part special right in the middle of the season that really felt like the big shift into the more personal drama that the show is becoming. And from here, in episodes 8 through 12, we really focus on Blitz and Stolas' relationship. This actually started before any new episodes would even air, with a special music video featuring Stolas with some of the most beautiful animation in the entire series. In this little special called Look My Way, Stolas was able to get an Osmodian crystal. This would allow Blitz to travel to Earth without Stolas' grimoire, transitioning their relationship into one where Blitz isn't actually obligated to come see Stolas in order to return that grimoire and pick it up again each month. This is what Stolas wants now, as he wants to give Blitz the understanding that he could just leave Stolas' life, but that he does want Blitz there as his own choice. And despite Blitz seemingly wanting to be a part of Stolas' life now, this was still a touchy subject that was doomed from the start. This exchange finally happened in episode 8, Full Moon, after a lengthy day of Blitz and Stolas preparing to meet each other under the pretense of starting their arrangement again. Previously, Stolas had let Blitz off the hook for a while, and with Blitz returning, he intends to give him the Osmodian crystal and the option to stop visiting him entirely. For Blitz, however, this is a precarious situation because he wants things to return to the way they were before, not to some new dynamic where there's even more pressure on him. While he's starting to acknowledge on some level that he would like to stay in Stolas' life, the only way that feels safe is with this system of play that they have set up for themselves. At first it was done for Stolas' benefit, but now Blitz needs the dynamic in order to feel safe, as it's what makes him feel wanted. As long as Stolas is chasing after him and forcing him to be in his life, he knows that Stolas isn't bored with him. But when presented with the Osmodian crystal in this episode, Blitz isn't sure how to take that, as it gives the impression that Stolas is comfortable with them being farther apart. What happened next is actually kind of controversial with the audience, as some people see it as needless drama based off of misunderstanding. Misunderstanding can be very real, but it often makes for bad drama in TV, as things can be resolved simply by the characters acknowledging that they misunderstood. But that isn't exactly what's going on here. One thing I think people don't talk about enough here is the way that a nervous person approaches dynamics with others in general. We're all internet weirdos here, so I think most of us have at least some experience where we assumed some sort of interaction was more positive than it actually was based off of what we misinterpreted. It can be as simple as someone telling you that they love you, and in that moment, especially to you, it may have felt like a dramatic buildup to something that the other person was struggling to share with you. But you may later learn that that person really just says that to everyone and that it wasn't a dramatic buildup at all. That to them, this kind of expression is actually rather casual and that they didn't mean that they loved you more than anyone else in their life in particular. And that's just more of an extreme example. Someone can also just offer you a little bit of food on a plate and you didn't realize that they were offering you just one piece of food from that plate instead of the entire plate itself. This sort of thing can happen to a person pretty much every day on some level, and it can lead to a person who only responds with the assumption that you mean the least intense version of what you are saying. It leads you to always respond under the assumption that they mean something less intense than you're hoping for, and acting like that is what they meant. This is a defense mechanism meant to stop you from embarrassing yourself, as if the other person does mean something different, they can still elaborate and explain. But this becomes a lot more embarrassing when you have an overreaction to what they said and misinterpret it in the worst possible way. The problem here is in this situation, Stolas himself isn't emotionally ready to deal with that sort of response. When Blitz is given the Osmodian crystal, he isn't sure what to make of it, and he claims that he thought Stolas was just doing some sort of roleplay. This probably isn't entirely true, and Blitz probably understood what Stolas was going for here, but he wasn't 100% sure, and it would have been really hurtful for Blitz to accept this as 100% the truth, only to have some sort of reveal afterwards that Stolas doesn't actually care for him all that much. What Blitz really wanted was just more context, for Stolas to reassure him that this really was a gift and that he can take it seriously. But Stolas, who had spent weeks or even months planning for this moment, wanted Blitz to have a perfect reaction as it happened. Blitz even did try to talk it out afterwards, but Stolas himself worked this situation up so much in his head that he legitimately could not handle that. It's similar to Blitz's situation in that it's very real and something a lot of us have probably had extremely dramatic experiences with ourselves, both as the Blitz in the situation and as the Stolas, unfortunately. It's hard not to fall in love with someone and at some point not get so worked up over the situation in your head that you're basically heartbroken before the moment actually comes because there's no way for it to go the way you want. This sort of breakup with Stolas set Blitz on a pretty downward spiral over the next 2 episodes, with Apology Tour and Ghost Effers. Yes. Apology Tour was the much more dramatic of the two, focusing on Blitz trying to apologize to all of his exes and people he had hurt in general after Stolas won't accept his apology. The previous episode, Full Moon, had a lack of drama until its very final scene, but Apology Tour scattered some drama throughout the entire episode, with Blitz trying to make amends with these different people, including people he had killed, like Martha. By the end of it, however, Blitz is able to really admit that he just wants Stolas in his life again, and he doesn't want to see Stolas with other people, even if he does let this happen in an attempt to act more mature. It was a fun way to bring Veronica back as well, with Veronica being so upset with her and Blitz's breakup that she throws a party every year for people who have been hurt by Blitz, like her. By the next episode, however, Blitz was still extremely vulnerable and really in a downward spiral that was destroying his business and other relationships. This left him susceptible to possession even, where his bad feelings could be turned against him, in what is probably my favorite filler episode of the entire series. And by filler here, I just mean not an event episode like the premieres and finales, or even the mid-season specials at this point, because that would probably make my favorite episode Mammon's mid-season special. But when it comes to the big event episodes, my favorite is undoubtedly the recent 2-part finale, as I think Mastermind and Sinsmiss really are a 2-part finale even if they aren't labeled as such. When the show first began, the characters were in a starting point that Vivziepop had developed, but there was something about their caricatures that Brandon Rogers saw a different story with. In many ways, this story didn't even really begin until season 2, when we started actually diving into the minds of Stolas and Blitz and start to paint a picture of why their relationship was so complex. Season 3 is supposed to air continuing where the story left off, but it's also supposed to be a brand new beginning of the show, with the ideas of the pilot being remade for the first episode in order to reintroduce the world and these characters to the audience. Even season 2 then is in many ways just the story that was required to get the characters where they needed to be for what Brandon Rogers had in mind. Season 3 and 4 are going to be bigger seasons with longer episodes and opportunities that get into the histories of even characters like Stella. And this final transition into the new story can be seen in the last 2 episodes of season 2, starting with Mastermind. Now, when it came to the episode Mastermind, I don't think anyone expected it to be as epic as it was. While season 1 felt like it had a 2-part finale as well, each half was equally epic as we discussed earlier, with episode 8 really being more of a fun sequel that copies the formula of episode 7 in order to maintain its scale. In Mastermind and Sinsmiss, however, we get something more like a classic 2-part finale, which often has the climax in the first episode, followed by something of an epilogue or coda to wrap things up on the emotional level, and that's what we got here. Mastermind started off dramatic by having Blitz and the IMP gang brought to the satanic courts in order to be put on trial for their business in the human world. Before this can happen, of course, Stolas manages to make it to the trial and sings a dramatic song where he confesses to helping Blitz himself instead of having his grimoire stolen or being taken advantage of in general. The punishment for Stolas ended up being a lot less dramatic than that for Blitz, with Stolas being exiled from the Ars Goetia and not even permanently. Still, it's long enough that Octavia has to take his role, and unfortunately, Stolas isn't supposed to even talk to her during this time. Now, as little as this episode focused on Octavia, it really was all about her in a way, seeing this happen from the TV screen with her mom instead of for herself. It was a heartbreaking way to see this happen, as 1 minute Stolas was just a distant father figure, and the next he was giving up his relationship with Octavia entirely, possibly allowing himself to be killed in Blitz's place just to save him. And all of this without even talking to Octavia, without just teleporting to her for a moment and letting her know that this is what he has to do, or even just invoking her name while giving his speech in front of the audience. And that led us to the finale Sinsmiss, which was 90% a more soft episode, but the first one where it feels like we really spend time with Blitz at his own home. And that last 10% really was the most dramatic, action-packed part of the entire season, with Luna taking on her full demon mode for Blitz to help Stolas fight Andrealphus before being rescued by Octavia. For most of the episode, we got the first look at what the new season itself will be. Stolas adjusting to a life of living in a small, 1-bedroom apartment where he doesn't even get the bedroom himself, as opposed to his lavish mansion with all of its servants. It's a life where he has to steal instead of having money for anything he wants, and one where the people boo him while simultaneously praising Blitz for having stood up to the elites and having survived with his trial being broadcast. It's the complete flip of their dynamic, with Blitz once being the lowest of the low as an imp, and one that many others didn't respect because of his fall from fame at a young age. The real climax here wasn't the battle itself, however, but just Stolas trying to talk to Octavia to let her know that he does really care, even if his actions don't seem to reflect that. But it just leads to Octavia telling him that she doesn't want to see him anymore. This didn't just flip Stolas and Blitz's dynamic, but Stolas and Octavia's as well. The problem before this was that Octavia was chasing Stolas to be a part of his life and was often being pushed out. But now it was Stolas who was chasing Octavia, and Octavia who was the one setting boundaries that kept Stolas at arm's length from her. Finally, one of my favorite scenes in the entire show is the very last one in this season, where Blitz and Stolas take some time outside together. Here, Stolas is just smoking, and Blitz asks to have some as well, and Stolas makes a little jab about the nature of their relationship, which is Blitz coming to him, but seemingly only when Blitz wants something. Like the truth of their relationship, however, Blitz just uses this as a pretense to feel safe approaching someone like Stolas, and ultimately does want to be around him. This leads to a wonderfully animated dancing sequence where Blitz stands up on a railing in order to be the same height as Stolas, and really even taller than him. It's a great visual representation of the little dance they've done over the last 2 seasons that led to Stolas elevating Blitz to a position over himself, sacrificing what he had not to be with Blitz, but to give Blitz a life that is now better than the one Stolas has for himself. In Season 1, the story had been about how Blitz had no choice but to be near Stolas. For Season 2, the story transitioned to Stolas letting Blitz leave his own space to see if Blitz will stay with him. And now we seem to be seeing what the structure will be for Seasons 3 and 4 due to the pattern observed in this video. Season 3 flips this dynamic by having Blitz being the boss of Stolas, and Stolas being the one without any power in their relationship. And Season 4 will likely transition to Blitz trying to give Stolas more space, and now Stolas having to be the one to decide if he's going to stay now that the space is there. But what do you guys think? This was a bit of a longer breakdown I wanted to do, not just for the show itself, but for the development of the relationship of these 2 characters. And there's so many places that this can go in Seasons 3 and 4, so let me know your theories on what's gonna happen next in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe so that you can hear us talk about the new episodes when they finally air. See you guys next time.